Is a 1.5 to 4 technically an LPVO? Usually, LPVOs start with a minimum magnification of around 1x. This clearly does not have that. So does that make this an LPVO, a low-powered variable optic? Well, I think it does. But the question still remains, who is this for?
Pew pew pew.
That is the question that we're going to be talking about today.
Pew 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 pew.
Is this going to be right for you? For many people, myself included, having a true 1x on an LPVO is the majority of the reason why we gravitate towards LPVOs to begin with. It's their versatility which makes them such a wildly popular optic, and rightfully so. Having a good 1x will give you borderline red dot or holographic sight capacity in closer engagements, but being able to turn a lever and bring it up to 4x as seen here, it's really nice and convenient.
Pew.
For any of you out there saying, well, why not just run a red dot or holographic sight in conjunction with a magnifier? Technically, you do have a valid point.
Pew.
But you're forgetting that some people out there have really bad astigmatisms, so red dots or holographic sights don't work for them. Why not get a prism and then run a piggyback red dot on top? Because the same rules apply. But still, the choice of going with a 1.5 minimum to 4 is still a little bit odd to some people.
Pew pew.
I don't necessarily agree with that 100%. So throughout this video, I'm going to try to see if you are the type of person
Pew pew pew.
that would be okay having a little bit of magnification to your minimum.
Pew 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 pew.
But first, let's go over this thing's physical attributes. First up, I bought this used, secondhand, and it did not have a box, so we're only going to be looking at the scope as a whole. You can tell very clearly that this is an illuminated version because that giant illumination knob right there. It is monstrously big and probably the weakest point of this. If you were to buy one of these without illumination, it's $500. Add the illumination on there, it's an extra $200. As you've already seen from the garage clearing segment, the illumination on this thing is extremely bright, sharp, and clear. It's very good, in fact, but is it going to be worth not only that extra $200, but having that giant knob on the side? Going over the basic features of this thing, it does have a 30mm tube, no locking on the eyepiece, a very short throw magnification ring, and some very basic turrets. So let's get into it real quick, showing you the weight. I showcased the weight a while ago in a picture post on YouTube, and I was blown away by how lightweight this is. Leupold claims is right around 13 ounces, 13.37 on my scale, which is not calibrated in any way, shape, or form, is immensely lightweight, including illumination. That's impressive. There are other very lightweight scopes out there, but they have smaller tubes and they have no illumination, aka the VX Freedom, which we will be talking about throughout this video. Fast focus eyepiece at the back is extremely thin line to the outside of the body. It has beautiful looking lines and it has excellent feel. There's only the minimalist amount of wiggle when it's all the way out with a quarter turn in. The dampening on this thing is fantastic. It requires a good amount of effort to really adjust it. And keep in mind, this is used, and I don't know how used it was, but nevertheless, even if this thing was brand new, it feels very good. Leupold really does do some things extremely good, and one thing that they always seem to get right is their magnification ring. Look at the throw on this thing. It's just over 90 degrees. Granted, it's only a 1.5 to 4, but regardless to that fact, this is one of the shortest sweeps of any optic I've ever gotten behind, and it really shows when you get behind this thing and you start wrenching it back and forth. It is so fast to go from its minimum to its maximum, partly because of how tight that sweep is, but also partly because of how giant that thumb cattail is. It is exceptionally nice. Feels extremely durable in hand. Like you could bang that cattail off of a table and it's not going to break it. The knurling on it is also exceptional, and you can remove it if you so choose. I just don't know why you would. From high praise to low craze, this illumination knob is probably one of the worst that I've ever felt. Again, I bought this thing used, so maybe that had something to do with it, but the amount of wiggle that is in this knob is insane. And I don't know if it's from the factory like that. I don't know if the guy had hit it into something. I don't know. You can clearly see me making hand gestures because of how big this thing really is. Now, it is nice to grab it and adjust it really quickly until you realize that this thing turns extremely easily and it's going to get caught on something and either turn on and kill the battery, or it's going to shut itself off, or something in between, like snag on something and break. The detents on this are extremely shallow and soft. There's no crisp detent to it. You can flip this thing from inside of one setting to another and barely even notice it. This thing also has hard stops on the minimum and the maximum end of things, so if you want to go from its minimum to its maximum, you have to turn the rheostat the entire way around to get it to where you want it to be. Some people will prefer that, some people will not. I would prefer it be 360 degrees rotation, just so if you want to go from minimum to maximum really fast, you can, but that's a big personal preference. As much as it doesn't feel like anything, at least it sounds like something.
I hear that all too well. But it's very easy to turn this. Like, way too easy. This thing should be damped 3 times as much.
Being mindful to remove the battery compartment cap, it does have a little bit smaller outside diameter than the knob itself, which is nice. You actually have to try to grab it. Pulling out the standard CR2032 battery, you can see we have a very good looking contact patch in there. The battery clicks in there pretty solidly, and with that cap on top nice and tight, you shouldn't have to worry about anything going wrong with this compartment. Pulling off the caps on both the windage and the elevation, and you can see that there is another bit of a letdown on this optic, and that is because these turrets are nothing really to write home about. They are about as basic as one could get. They are the same cap for the windage and the elevation, and there's no real marking to line it up. So if you wanted to actually physically watch your turret index on something to figure out how many clicks you're going, you're going to be hard pressed to figure that out. You're going to have to do this 100% by feel or by sound. And unfortunately with that, they don't really sound as good as they feel. Let me give you a listen.
That is extremely hard to turn. These are plastic. They are splined on the outside, which is a necessity because these things are really tight to turn. You could actually see, well, you guys might not be able to see, but as you turn this, the cap actually comes off of the detent and locks into place. These are very tight. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Easy enough to feel them with your fingertips when you're making an adjustment. Not a lot of sound. The windage doesn't feel as good as the elevation, but as far as the click goes, but definitely still the same amount of resistance.
So this thing very clearly has some pros and some cons. It's small, it's only 9.5 inches overall length, it's very lightweight, just over 13 ounces. The illumination on it's very bright, the fast focus eyepiece and the magnification ring are basically perfect, but everything else sort of falls a little bit flat. Let's get behind this thing again and see if at least optically it can perform, well, worthy of its $700 price point. The Illuminated SPR second focal plane reticle is probably the reticle of choice that I would go with for this magnification range. It very clearly is because that's what I bought it for. I like the look of it. It's very easy to pick up at any magnification, again because it's in the second focal plane. I like that donut in the middle. It does help me draw my eye towards the center, especially if you're trying to engage something fast and close. And the illumination on it, I was hoping would be at least good, but as you've already seen, and you will continue to see, the illumination on this thing is spectacular. But what happens if you're not in the mood or you don't have the requirement for a illuminated LPVO? You could save the $200 and buy the non-illuminated version, or you can save a further $200 and you can buy something like the VX Freedom 1.5-4. I reviewed that scope several years ago now, and it's one of the very few scopes that I really regret not buying. That's part of the reason why I ended up buying this, because I wanted something that would replace the VX Freedom 1.5-4, and I got a decent deal on this thing used, so I figured, let's see how well it performs. And it's a very good benchmark because the 1.5-4 VX Freedom was exceptional in basically every single way. It just didn't feature illumination. It's still made in the US like these Mark III HDs. They only come in for $300. The biggest difference between the VX Freedom and the Mark III HD is going to be tube size. The Freedoms are 1 inch and the Mark IIIs are 30 millimeter. I went off on a bit of a tangent there. I'm not even talking about the tracking segment, which is what we're currently looking at. This thing tracks extremely well. Everything lines up very well. There's very little to no slop in the erectors. When you do make a slight adjustment, or at least when I found out, when I make a slight adjustment with the elevation, the windage does shift by about 1/10 of a mil or so. It's very, very minimal, and it's only when you're making an adjustment. If you put this thing on and you find your zero and you leave it, you shouldn't have to worry about anything. And thankfully so, because I would hate to have to constantly make adjustment with these turrets because they're really not great. Coming out to the light and looking at some more extended distances, I have to say that I left the scope 1 pixel farther forward on the rail from where perfect eye relief is. So as a result of that, the outside edge of the image will be a little bit softer, but you will see later on that that is not always the case. Now, for anyone wondering about distortion at 1.5x, it's going to be substantially less than what you'd find on a true 1x LPVO. In fact, if you take any sort of LPVO that does have some sort of distortion issues at the minimum of 1x, all you have to do is crank them up to about 1.2, 1.3 to ensure that most of that distortion is now gone. This being, again, only a 3x multiplier and being a minimum 1.5x means that we don't have any sort of distortion issues at 1.5x. The image is extremely flat, clear, and crisp and easy to get behind. All of our targets look very good as far as their overall sharpness and them being in focus to one another. The reticle itself looks bang on perfect. There was a scotch of haze in the air when I filmed this, but that's not an excuse for this thing to be a poor performer at distance. However, everything inside that 250-yard tree line at the 9 o'clock position and in does look exceptionally good at 1.5x, which is primarily where we're going to be using 1.5x at anyway. If you do decide to increase the magnification, however, all the way up to 4x is a very short sweep, and we are left with, again, a very good looking image. You can note the haze to the air from the trees not being as green and vibrant all the way out in the background at 700 yards. But even so, with that, we have pretty good contrast, pretty good brightness in colors and clarity on our 400-yard brick building. Also, not a touch of chromatic aberration to speak of. This thing only being a 1.5-4, only having a 3x magnifier, means that we should have some pretty decent image stabilization when we get way off of our zero. At 4x here, you can see we have a lot of side-to-side movement that we are allowed to still be able to look through this thing. The illumination is bright off into the shadows, again, because it's in the second focal plane. We do not really notice that much, if any, sort of loss of sharpness to both the reticle and the image. Bringing it back to about 2.5x, the only thing we can expect is at least a similar performance at 4x. But truth be told, it does get a little bit more forgiving. I could not find the exit pupil sizes for this scope. I'm sure they're somewhere buried online, but the eye relief on this is 3.7 to 4 inches, which is pretty standard across most LPVOs. Bringing it back to 1.5x, and we are gifted with a giant view looking through this, as well as a very forgiving eyebox to this thing. Let's look at it now in a more dynamic sense to give you a better sense of what it actually looks like to get behind. Starting at 1.5 and working our way up, you can dance around this thing and still be able to look through it. I am probably about 2 feet away from the scope at that point, and you could still find the center on this thing. It is a joke how easy it is to find the center on this thing and get behind it. It's wonderful in that regard. We also don't notice that much distortion to the image when we look through it. A lot of times on LPVOs at 1x, you'll have the outside of the image really start to fishbowl around it. This again only being a 1.5 minimum, we don't really notice that. Going straight to 4x, you can still see we can get way behind this thing and find our way all the way to our proper eye relief distance with ease. The illumination does definitely help draw your eye more towards the center, but nevertheless, the reticle and the scope overall is wonderful in this regard. It's truly fantastic. Low light testing is very important on a scope like this, in my opinion, because I think that a lot of people would probably end up using this for hunting. 1.5 to 4 might not sound like a lot of magnification, But in some hunting roles, you don't want to have too much magnification because you're just going to lose your target very easily. Illumination gets way too bright in this environment. We only go up to about brightness number 2 here, and you can see it's still perfectly visible and usable. We have a lot of information that we can still see here, even at well past dusk at 4x magnification. You can see the brick building, you can make out all of those hard lines that are on it, and it is, quite frankly, a very good performance, as it should be. Despite the fact this thing only has a 20mm front objective size, the fact that it's only a 3x magnifier and only a 4x on the top end means that it's not going to stop that much light from coming through its system. And it shows. As good as this thing performs, it's up against some pretty stiff competition. Let's take a look. And I'm going to put it up against one of my favorite, if not my favorite, 1-4 LPVOs. Of course, I'm talking about the Steiner P4XI 1-4x24. These things were like $400 back in the day. Now, depending on Reticle, you could expect to pay from $500 to $900 for a P3TR like this. These things aren't necessarily direct competitors, however. The Mark III HD does come in much lighter, about 4 ounces lighter. The P4 is around 17.3 ounces. Lengthwise, again, the P4 is going to be almost an inch longer. But capacity-wise, the P4 has got it out. Because again, if you want that true 1x performance, you're going to get a very, very good 1x performance with the P4. You will not get that with the Mark III. However, at 4x, both of these things perform extremely well. Also, the view through both of them are pretty damn similar, despite the fact that the field of view is actually a little bit larger on the Mark III. At 4x, they claim 29.4 feet. The Steiner's only 27.5 feet. It is a little bit of a difference. Would you really notice it? It's less than 10% though. You're probably splitting hairs at that point. Nevertheless, if you're looking for a larger field of view, the Mark III will have you beat at 4x, but only just. As nice as the illumination is on the Mark III, it's got to go to the P4. It is truly super daytime bright. Not the brightest on the market, but still it holds its own, even many years going on. Now, I cannot vouch for the G1 reticle version of the P4XI. I personally do not like how that looks in any way, shape, or form. But if you want to get your hands on a P4XI brand new for $500, you're going to have to suck it up and go with the G1 reticle. However, you do find these P4s pop up used for around the $500 to $600 price point, which does make them a pretty good deal, all things considered. However, even then, it's still up against some very stiff competition from 1 to 6 second focal plane LPVOs. So I guess we'll just leave that topic for another video, but if you're specifically looking for a 1-4, this is probably about as good as it's going to get. Would I be willing to pony up the $900 to buy a P4 nowadays? Probably not, but I also don't think I would spend $700 on an Illuminated Mark III HD. But see, you might be saying, you intelligent individuals, there's more than just the P4XI on the market for a second focal plane 1-4 that also just so happens to be lightweight. And you're absolutely right. Cue in the Trijicon TR24, which is a 1-4x24 in the second focal plane. This and the AccuPower that I had reviewed both had a major flaw, however. Optically, they're garbage. Look at this image here at 1x. That's as good as I can get it. Not just on the TR24, but also the AccuPower brother. They're not very good looking optically. Yes, it's true. Weight-wise, it's only 1 ounce heavier than the Mark III, and it does offer some really nice features as basically being as simple and as rudimentary as possible for an LPVO. And yeah, technically it's in line with the illuminated version of the Mark III as far as the price point goes. They're around $750. But this is as good optically as I could get this thing. Granted, it was only a serving size of 1 with the TR24 for myself, but there are plenty of other people that I trust that have had very similar performances with the TR24. Piss poor. But I also had very similar performances with the 1-4 AccuPower, which is the battery-powered version of the TR24, where the TR24 is powered with tritium and fiber optic, which works well when the tritium is in really good shape. Here it's okay, and actually pretty close on par with the Mark III HD. As far as how these stack up side by side, well, the weight, it's going to go with the Leupold. It is going to be about an ounce lighter. Lengthwise, the TR24 is about 3/4 of an inch longer. Field of view wise, well, we can't really compare these two because they're not the same on the bottom end, but on the top end, the TR24 is 24.2 feet versus 29.4, so a pretty massive difference. Which one would I take? Well, the choice is quite clear, literally. Truth be told, there are more 1-4s on the market, but if you're going to be willing to spend $700-ish for a Mark III HD like this, wouldn't you be willing to spend about another $200 to get a TR25 1-6 second focal plane like this? Now, yes, these are not necessarily direct competitors to one another. The TR25 is much more expensive. It's also much heavier, 19 ounces on my scale. But if you want to have a 1-6 experience that isn't a Razer HD Gen 2, because everyone's got one of those, you want to be a little bit more unique, look no further than the Trijicon TR25. I wanted to roll this side by side for a couple of reasons. One, I really do like the TR25, and I am trying to persuade myself to one day buying one of them. I do think that it is not represented well enough on the market. It is exceptionally exceptional. Yes, that makes sense in my head. I wouldn't necessarily go for the red triangle post. I'd go with like a German number 4 or something along those lines, run a very simple dope setup, a 25 200 yard 0 or 36 300, and I would just run the ever-loving crap out of it. And yeah, I would love the thing. Glass-wise, it is superior to a lot of other optics on the market. View through the thing-wise, it is, again, vastly superior to many other scopes on the market. Field of view is huge. Down low, it's 117.5 feet at the minimum, but only 18 at its maximum, but that's because it's a 6X, not a 4X like the Mark III HD. Lengthwise, it's also about an inch and a half longer than the Mark III HD, and again, it's going to be exceptionally more expensive than the Mark III HD. Why is this even a side-by-side comparison here? Again, because I wanted to. And to showcase that, God, the TR25 is really nice. Anyway, that's it for this one. Yeah, there's no real comparison to really be had. Okay, see, maybe I do want to try a 1-6, but I'm not willing to go more expensive than what you can get a VX Freedom 1.5-4 for. Well, very simple solution. Primary Arms SLX Nova. This 1-6 second focal plane scope comes in around the $300 price point, give or take. It's going to be 17.9 ounces on the weight. So yeah, about 4.5 ounces heavier than the Mark III, but it's going to have a monster field of view at 1x and a very big field of view at 6x. In fact, it's larger than what the TR25 boasts. Is that actually true? Putting them side by side is really splitting hairs. Depending on what your eye looks like and how the diopter is set, that could change a little bit of your field of view, but it's more or less just splitting hairs. If you're sitting at home watching from your couch or watching on your computer or watching while you're taking a dump on your phone, if you are seriously wondering why anyone would buy the Mark III HD, then it's very clearly not for you. But how does it compare to the Nova? Well, the Nova is it's a slam dunk. There are some caveats with it, but overall, it's a very good performing 1-6 second focal plane scope, which you probably already know because you probably already watched my dedicated review on that scope. However, I'm going to now cut this comparison quite short because you're not watching this video because you're thinking about buying a Nova or 1-6. You're watching this video probably because you want to buy a very lightweight optic, and the Nova and even the TR25 are not going to be choices that you'd even come close to considering. The Mark III HD 1.5-4, I think, is more touted as a tactical scope. It certainly has the look, it certainly has the DNA of a tactical scope, but I believe it's much more in line with a hunting scope. I think that this scope would be a phenomenal hunting optic. It's very lightweight. It's got very simple controls, albeit I really don't like the illumination knob on this thing, but the reticle is excellent. The glass is excellent. It has great light transmission, and it's overall extremely simple and easy to use. Why else would you want to buy a scope like this unless you're probably going to be putting on your back and rucking through the woods for hours on end. Now, is this only limited to the hunting community? Absolutely not. You can put this on a tactical lever gun. It would look the part on like a 357 modern tech lever gun. And it would be the perfect magnification range for a gun of that style. I really do think that a lot of people get caught up in more magnification is better. Not necessarily the case. A good, clean, sharp 4X as seen here on this Mark III HD can allow you to make very precise shots on target. You can still print very small groups if you're a good shooter and your gun is also capable of it. You have high resolution, high clarity, great light transmission, a very simple, very practical reticle. This thing is as good as it could ever possibly be for what it is. I think Leupold really hit the nail on the head with this optic, again with the exception of that illumination control. This is the only time that I wish Leupold put their push-button illumination control on this thing, because not only would it be a lot slimmer, it'd also be a lot easier to use and save on some weight and really fit the motif of this optic better than what this giant fucking pimple wart of a knob looks like. That is hopefully something you'll never hear me say again, because I hate push-button illumination, but I do feel it would better suit this optic as opposed to what they threw on there with the rheostat. I really do think that Leupold made a great optic with this Mark III HD 1.5-4. Would I spend $700 on it? Only if I really felt like I needed illumination. If I did not need illumination, I would happily be capable and willing to spend the $500 to buy this optic. But if you want 90 to 95% what this optic offers without illumination, but you're not willing to spend the $500 on it, there's a very simple solution for you. Buy the VX Freedom 1.5-4x20. They are far closer in specs than they are farther apart. The only real difference is there's a 1-inch tube on the VX Freedom as opposed to 30mm tube here with the Mark III, but they managed to be 4 ounces lighter. And you're not limited to shitty reticles either. The MOA ring is very similar to this SPR, and the Pigplex is also available, which is something that I really do like. You also get the exact same field of view. That's right. 74.2 feet at the minimum and 29.4 feet at the maximum. That's incredible. And of course, the same goes for the eye relief. I really wanted to do a side-by-side comparison between those two, but all of my footage from the VX Freedom wasn't on par with what my more modern filming technique is like. So I didn't want to do it and bring it in and just have it look like shit. But every time I got behind the Mark III HD, I was reminded of how good the VX Freedom really was. The only thing that comes to mind as a possible negative would be durability. I do feel the Mark III would be a little more durable long-term as long as you get it without the illumination. With all that being said, I don't think there's anything left to say other than I don't think you can go wrong with either the VX Freedom or the Mark III HD if you're looking for a super lightweight 1.5-4 LPVO. The only reason why I sold the Mark III HD was because I still have the P4XI. If I didn't have it, I probably would have kept it. So, with that being said, thank you all very much for watching. And as always, see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe Star subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.